All right. Welcome everybody to the latest session in our Just Add AI series. So for those of you who've maybe been a part of some of the previous webinars in the series, you'll be familiar with the topic that we're covering, but our Just Add AI webinar is essentially a bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at what are the possibilities of AI and what are also the potential pitfalls of AI. And, spoiler alert, it's not really quite as simple as, just add AI. So this is the latest installment in that series where we're going to be looking at balancing AI implementation with digital accessibility. My name is Kat Barrow. I'm a senior digital strategy consultant here at Squiz. And my co-host, Toby, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Hi, everyone. I'm Toby. I'm consulting director down here based in London. Been with Squiz for just over 10 years. So yeah, very much feel like part of the furniture. And yeah, get to spend my days chatting with our wonderful customer base around creating really fantastic digital and crucially accessible experiences.
Awesome. All right. So before we get into the main content, just a couple of housekeeping things. So firstly, we are recording this session and we will make it available to you guys after the session. So we will email that through. Please, this is a session where we really appreciate your input and your thoughts. You will see that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can add any questions that you might be interested in asking. Please, as we go along, if anything jumps to mind, pop it in there. We'll be monitoring that and we will answer some questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to all of those questions, we are keeping a record of them and we will make sure that we send those answers through with the rest of the content after the session. And lastly, if there's anything that you have problems with, please just pop something into the chat. We will monitor that and we'll try our best to make sure that you're set up properly. So without further ado, let's move on and we'll do a quick intro to Squiz for those of you who may not be working with us currently. So Squiz is an AI-powered digital experience platform, or DXP for short, and we have offices in the United States, in Europe, and Australia and New Zealand as well. And our goal is really to make it easy for marketers and developers to build and manage and optimize intelligent enterprise websites, as well as things like portals and web app experiences as well. We offer multiple AI functions within our platform that are really designed to support our customers with content management, with personalization, with optimization, and also with visual page building, allowing your editors, your content writers to really create engaging and effective web experiences. One of the great things about the platform is that integration is very much a key point that the platform has been based on. So we're integration friendly. And what that means is that you can come as you are. So you can bring the platforms and the tools that you already use. You can integrate those really easily with Squiz, and we play nicely with others, which means that you're able to create really seamless, really integrated experiences for your customers and your end users. We've been around since 1998, so we've been around for a while. And through that time, we've embraced a growing number of customers in different organizations and different industries, from higher education to government and professional services. So that's a little bit about us. So with our introductions done, I might pass over to Toby just to provide us a little bit of scene setting about what we're actually going to be covering off today.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Kat. Before we sort of properly get into it, I just wanted to share this quote, which is actually from our co-founder, JP. And I think it really kind of nicely summarizes our take on AI and how AI kind of should be viewed. I'll read the quote. AI should be viewed as a rapidly learning intern. It needs training and opportunities to do work, but if given proper guidance, it can become increasingly expert at specific tasks. I think it's a really good way of kind of framing how we should treat AI. And you'll probably notice, Kat and I will sort of hark back and link back to this quote quite a number of times throughout this webinar. Firstly, though, just a kind of a quick running order of what we're going to be covering off today. Firstly, the AI accessibility imperative. Then we're going to go into how AI impacts content accessibility. Then we'll go into how AI impacts interface accessibility. Then we'll go into the new path to content discovery. As Kat mentioned as well, we'll have a bit of time at the end for a Q&A. So yeah, if any questions do arise, please do pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom. Kat, back to you.
Great. So before we dive into some of the specifics around AI and accessibility, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of take a little bit of a step back and consider some of the broader questions, like what is accessibility? Why is it important in the first place? And specifically, why is it important now? So, for the purposes of this talk and just generally, we've chosen to define accessibility as being about ensuring that everyone has equitable and easy access to information and services. So, it's not just about ensuring that, we cater to people with different abilities and different needs. It's about ensuring that everybody who is coming to our websites is able to access information and services in a way that meets their needs and meets them where they are. And the thing is, we mostly are aware of accessibility and its importance, but I think what's important to consider is why is it important now? So one of the things I think that's really important to consider here is that accessibility benefits everybody. And you may have come across this sort of framing of accessibility before, but I think it's worth revisiting. And that's that there are three types of accessibility needs. So the first is the one that probably comes to mind when you hear accessibility, right? Which is people who are living with permanent disabilities and have permanent accessibility requirements. That might be somebody who has a visual impairment or a cognitive impairment. And they have a permanent need for us to ensure that they are able to access digital experiences in a way that meets their needs. The second group of people, which may be less common, maybe less of something that comes to mind when we're talking about accessibility, is people who have temporary accessibility needs. So, like in the picture, that might be somebody who's broken their arm, so they can only use one hand. It may be somebody who's recently had eye surgery, and so they can't see particularly well. So, this is a whole group of people who, although they aren't suffering from or experiencing permanent disabilities, they are people who are still going to benefit from an accessible experience. And then the third group is what we refer to as situational. So this is people who, in that particular moment, in that particular context, have an accessibility requirement. And I love this picture because, it's a really great example. This woman's obviously just gotten her little baby to sleep, and we all know that that's something that you really don't want to mess with once it's happened. So she's trying to use her app and her web experiences with one hand. Similarly, you might have somebody who is squinting to see a screen outside in the bright sunlight, or maybe they're in a loud environment and they can't hear. So, this is the full sort of spectrum of people who are going to benefit from an accessible experience. So, while we might be driving towards ensuring that we're catering to the needs of people who have a permanent disability, there are going to be trickle-on effects to a whole range of people who maybe don't have a permanent disability, but at that moment in time are going to benefit from that experience. So now that we've kind of defined why accessibility is important, who it's going to benefit, what it actually is, I think it's really critical to think about why is it important now? Because we're all aware of accessibility. We've all known for a long time that this is something that we need to be considering in the experiences that we create. So why is it particularly important now? And I think there are a few things to consider here. One is the legal reality. So we know that things like WCAG 2.2 AA compliance are becoming increasingly mandatory. And with that comes a legal responsibility and a compliance responsibility to ensure that our experiences are meeting those standards. The second is that there's actually a rising need for accessible experiences. We have 1.3 billion, sorry, way more than 1.3 million, 1.3 billion people around the world who have some kind of disability that they are living with. And that's approximately 16% of the world's population. If you add to that the fact that more and more services and information are being made available digitally, more and more people are adopting digital channels for, the primary way that they achieve their day-to-day tasks. The population is growing. The population is also aging, which brings with it a whole bunch of accessibility requirements as well. There is really an increasing demand for accessible experiences. The third factor to consider here is the business benefit. So, as we've just discussed, an accessible experience benefits a very broad audience of people and actually makes for better experiences and more effective experiences that are going to help drive your business outcomes. It delivers SEO benefits and actually, really importantly, has a very significant positive impact on your brand perception, especially in younger generations who are making very values-based decisions when they're operating online. And then I think the last and probably most relevant to today's talk point that we need to consider here is the risk that AI potentially poses to accessibility. So we all know accessibility is important. We're all aware of it. We're all doing our best to implement it. But I think that with the rise in AI technologies and all of the efficiencies and all of the benefits that that brings, there is a real risk that we accidentally, inadvertently create less accessible experiences if we aren't being specific, if we aren't being deliberate in how that AI is applied. And so to finish the slide off, I found this statistic, which I think is either going to really terrify you or potentially make you feel just a little bit better about your own web experiences and your level of accessibility compliance. But 94.8% of the world's top 1 million homepages had detectable WCAG failures. So that's 94.8% of homepages. And we all know that homepages get probably far more than their fair share of resources and attention. So that would really imply a far broader lack of compliance there as well. So all of that to say that we know that implementing accessibility is hard. And this is, where the real opportunities for AI actually come in. So I guess the question then, with our tongue-in-cheek title here is, so do we just add AI? Do we just use AI to fix this problem? And the answer is, of course, sort of. Yes, AI has incredible benefits from an accessibility perspective and incredible opportunity to make us more efficient and reduce the amount of resources it actually takes for us to be accessible. But, as Toby was talking about, AI is very much still an intern. So without the appropriate insight, it can really become a liability and it can create accessibility issues. And that's what we want to cover off today.
Awesome. So yeah, I guess the question is, how does AI impact content accessibility? And it's a big question and a really good question. And yeah, you can see here, firstly, the challenges around that. So if you think about AI, as we talked about, as your enthusiastic but inexperienced intern, it's not uncommon to see AI-generated content out there that's overly complex and verbose, and that makes it potentially really tough to understand. It's often riddled with biases that can exclude or even offend different groups of people in sort of extreme circumstances, something that isn't uncommon. It'll frequently guess at or assume a certain level of knowledge or include complex jargon that I'm sure lots of people working in very complex organizations, we know that jargon is a big problem. We often know what it means internally, but to a user, it's a bit more confusing. And it might be poorly structured, right? Which might make it difficult for things like screen readers to pick up and to understand and to convey to a user. On the flip side, though, if you can provide AI with that kind of appropriate level of guidance and instruction, as per it being an intern, then it can break down complex things into plainer language that's easier to understand. I find myself doing that with AI frequently throughout the day. It can respond at the same reading level as the question that was asked, which is crucial. Not everybody speaks at the same level of reading ability. So yeah, the ability to kind of mimic and echo that is really important. It can self-generate highly accessible content if you guide it in a way that gets it to do that, making sure that it's taking into account assistive technologies like screen readers. Yeah, it can do that if you prompt it accordingly. And yeah, probably another one which I was going to say guilty of. I don't think it's necessarily something to be ashamed of, but I do it all the time, every day, all day, every day. The ability for it to kind of continually break down these complicated concepts into increasingly simpler, formats until it's reached the user's particular level of understanding. In order to make sure that we're working with AI to deliver the best possible experiences, this comes down to prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is a really, really crucial part of this step. It's probably a term that a lot of people are familiar with. And again, if we hark back to the kind of intern analogy, if you haven't explained to your intern, for example, that they work in a kitchen, in this particular example, and that the questions they're going to receive will most likely be related to food, it's probably pretty understandable that intern is going to get confused when they get a question, in this example, related to sauces versus dressing, which is brilliant. Yeah, and I think Kat managed to dig this one out after trying to break Google Gemini. It's a really good example of how prompting can contain errors, right? It can contain issues, which you often don't even think about until you get down the sort of trial and error route. But if you're not really prescriptive about the types of things you want AI to speak to users about and in what way, you can very quickly kind of fall into traps like this, where you start getting some slightly strange information in the context of what a user's actually looking for. Yeah, here's an example, I think, of what good and bad might look like if we were to use, for example, our own conversational search feature at Squiz. So it helps to probably, in this example, imagine that you are the intern with limited prior knowledge about Squiz and what we do. And if in that example we were to ask you to write something about our new search tool, well, like, write what exactly? What do you mean? That's so kind of generic and so general. And I'll give it a go, but there's a good chance I'm going to get that wrong. It's not very useful. It should be good and explain why it's useful. Make it sound cool. So again, like, good and cool are pretty subjective things in this particular context. You're really asking for a sort of a hell of a lot without providing a huge amount of guidance. So we can't then be surprised when we get bad answers. And if you compare that to the good prompt example, you can clearly see, I think, how much better equipped you would be as an intern getting those instructions than you would be if you were getting the instructions at the top there. So yeah, I think it's really important to consider the level of instruction and information and guideline that you give from a prompt engineering point of view. And like, you won't get it right straight away, right? There's a lot of trial and error that has to happen with prompting, which we'll talk about later on. It's amazing how many things that you sort of assumed, like, you have assumed knowledge, right? You assume it will answer questions in a certain way, and often it won't. And that does take a bit of trial and error, but it's quite a fun and engaging, interesting process, getting it to the point where, yeah, you've got a really good intern that can answer questions in a really good way. Yeah, in terms of kind of an AI prompting checklist, so here are there's 12 things on this list. I'm not going to run through kind of every one individually. I'll perhaps just kind of call out a few. Defining tone of voice, I think, is really essential. It's something we are working a lot with our customers at the moment. So obviously every brand or organization seeks to speak to its users or customers in a very specific way. It's all about tone and personality. That's a really important thing. And your AI should be no different, right? We want AI to follow suit in that respect. But yeah, we need to tell it how to do that, right? We need to explain how it should be speaking to people. Otherwise, it's going to guess, and it's pretty unlikely it's going to get that right without some guidance. Things like avoiding acronyms is a really good one. It's amazing how many organizations use acronyms like really extensively. We do it at Squiz a lot, especially internally. And you'll be sat in a meeting talking about some acronyms, and you'll realize that actually people are staring blankly at you, and they've got no idea what all of these different acronyms mean. So yeah, it's really easy for that kind of language to sneak into the public domain, which can be very confusing to users, and we have to kind of check ourselves on that a lot. Including audience context is another really good one. If you can kind of tell your AI or tell your intern a little bit about your audiences, the types of things that they're likely to want, the types of things that they're possibly looking for example, that's hugely valuable information in helping to frame answers in a certain way if it knows that users are going to be seeking out certain things. So yeah, that's a much quicker route to like really meeting users' needs, really understanding what the intent of the user is. Separate to this checklist, there are just a few things to call out as well. One which we've touched on already is this idea of like trial and error, right? So I've not seen anybody do like prompt engineering like once and get it right like straight away. It's a hard thing to do. It's not a hard thing to do per se. It's a hard thing to get right straight away. Like, it does require a lot of kind of finessing and tweaking, and that's fine. Like, trial and error is great. We want to set up a set of prompts, run some questions through it, see what we get out of it. Chances are, hopefully, it'll be pretty good, but there'll be room for improvement. And yeah, constantly kind of doing those rounds of testing to figure out what those improvements should be is really important. Another couple of things, so creating like prompt templates, once effective versions that have been found, is super important. That idea of kind of repeatability, right? You don't want to kind of do something once and then have to start from scratch every single time. Yeah, you want to be efficient in these processes. Kind of linked to that as well as this idea of encouraging sort of team sharing as well. So AI improves, the more it's used, right? The more people that are playing with it, the more people from different perspectives and viewpoints that are asking different things and trying to almost kind of break it in different ways. That results in a better end product, right? The more kind of people within your team that have got the opportunity to dig around with it. So yeah, in terms of leveraging the capabilities of your tools and platforms, there's a few there's lots of really good examples out there of being able to get good outcomes. One thing that I just wanted to kind of highlight that we have available in the DXP, which is pretty cool, giving people the opportunity to kind of use AI and embed AI into current processes. We've got a really cool thing in the visual page builder within Matrix at Squiz, which allows you to kind of go in there and upload things like your tone of voice or your brand guidelines. You might want to encourage it to speak maybe in a more formal way to certain audiences, maybe a more casual way to certain audiences. Like literally there are infinite amounts of different things or different ways that you could prompt it, depending on your audience base. Obviously, you probably don't want to have too many. You don't want to get too granular with it. But actually taking advantage of the platforms and the tools that you already use, which will increasingly have AI kind of built into them to make your life easier and to be able to kind of speak to users in a more consistent way that kind of takes a lot of the pressure off your content editors as well, right? So rather than having 50 content editors who have all got to be really au fait with your tone of voice and your brand guidelines and how you write and how you speak, all of that kind of stuff, wouldn't it be so much easier if we had all of that kind of built in to the visual page builder, where we can just check it and say, hey, here's a piece of content. Can you check that I'm meeting all of the things that I need to? Are we speaking in the right way? Is this meeting accessibility criteria? Taking advantage of those increasingly good tools, I would say, that are cropping up all over the place in lots of digital things that you use is really, really essential. I don't know, Kat, if you had anything to add on that point at all, or if I can move on.
No, I mean, I think you covered it. I think, the tools like this are a really great way to, which is what you were just saying before, take those prompts that have been so carefully fine-tuned and make them available to a broader audience of people so that that work that you've done is then able to be shared across the team, which A, reduces the amount of effort that they need to put into engineering their own prompts, but also creates a lot of consistency, which is especially important when you're looking at accessibility, because you can really tightly define what your accessibility kind of good looks like within your prompt and then just apply that across your whole website.
Yeah, great point. One of the things I actually really like about this as well, particularly from us, we work with a lot of HE institutions, a lot of universities who are constantly running, campaigns, be it on social media or email or whatever it might be. And they're often really highly targeted, right, at different audiences. So it might be undergraduate, it might be postgraduate, it might be parents even. And actually the way that you speak to those people is different, right? You will probably speak to an undergraduate differently to how you would speak to a parent. Those two groups have different needs from an accessibility point of view as well. So actually being able to have something set up, prompt set up that allow you to, really quickly flip between two different audiences in that way while still retaining really high levels of accessibility is a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to pause for just a minute here. Bit of audience interaction required. So yeah, we basically want to hear from everybody on the webinar around what your biggest accessibility challenges are when implementing AI. So very soon you should see a poll window pop up on your screen. And we really love it if you could just take a minute to maybe select and submit your answer there in terms of what your biggest accessibility challenge is. And we'll chat through the responses. We'll give maybe 20-30 seconds just to get everybody to submit an answer.
Yeah, and I was saying earlier, one of the reasons we love doing these kinds of webinars is it really does give us an opportunity, A, to share the insights that we gather, but also to hear back from the people who are in the webinar about what is really top of your mind. What are your big challenges? What's keeping you awake at night? So that we can take that knowledge and build it into the decisions that we make from a DXP perspective. We really love hearing from you. So at the same time, if you finish the poll, if you have any burning questions, now's another good chance to pop those in the Q&A as well so that we can come back to them at the end of the session. I'll give it a couple more seconds.
It's so annoying that we can't vote on it, Kat, isn't it? It's quite tempting just to
I know, I was just reading through it thinking, oh, what would I choose? But I've got all the challenges from all of our different customers floating around in my head, so I'm not quite sure which one I would choose, to be honest. Oh, drum roll. So it looks like, the top challenge that's come back is compliance and legal requirements, which is not surprising, is it, Toby?
Absolutely, yeah. It's probably the one we hear most commonly about. I think there's generally sort of a worry, right, that anything that a user does or anything that one of our customers does is going to have issues with compliance and legal requirements. We work with a lot of government organizations, right? We work with a lot of universities where this kind of stuff is like critically important. There's an example I often use, which is potentially I worry about showing it, but actually I think it's really good to kind of head it off. There's a famous example, I think, isn't there, of chatbots that have kind of gone awry in the past, where they've kind of gone a little bit off piste and said things that they shouldn't, and that kind of thing. And yeah, being able to head that off, we talk about it a lot in the kind of the product, the tooling that we have for conversational search. Having those guardrails up is critically important. So yeah, in order to kind of meet those compliance regulations and legal requirements, that is absolutely front of mind. And I think the way to kind of think about it in terms of AI is that they're there to help you with that, right? So as we know, based on the stat that you shared earlier, Kat, actually meeting accessibility requirements is difficult, right? It's a difficult thing to do. Loads of people are failing around it, but we really can, I think, use AI to help us get to a much better spot across the board. We can automate a lot of that stuff. We can really, I think, improve the experiences that users are having. And when I say improve the experiences, I think a lot of people don't equate accessibility with that, whereas I do. Like, to me, and like accessibility and UX aren't sort of like mutually exclusive things, right? Like great UX is often really like really accessible by definition. I think it's a bit of a kind of a general myth where it's like, oh, if something's ultra accessible, it's not going to be like visually the UX isn't going to be as good, and like that's so not the case. But yeah,
100%. I totally agree with you. And I think, that leads quite well into this next section, actually, which is looking at how AI impacts interface accessibility. So, we've already talked a little bit about how AI impacts the generation of content. And I think, generative AI, the clues in the title, it's very good at generating things. And I think that first wave of AI has really been focused on how we generate content, how we generate written content, how we generate imagery. But I think we're very close to the sort of second wave of this kind of AI era that we're in, which is AI taking on more complex tasks. So looking at things like generating interfaces or optimizing interfaces, looking at things like dynamic personalization. And so very soon, any kind of interface that we interact with is going to have some element of AI optimization and design going on in the background. And so that really makes it crucial for us to think about how that is going to impact either positively or negatively the accessibility of that experience.
Apologies, having some screen issue sharing.
That's all right. Seems to be working now.
I think we're back in.
Yeah, awesome. So much like Toby was covering off before, there's going to be challenges and there's going to be opportunities. So from a challenges perspective, if you are leaning into AI's ability to generate designs and generate UIs and user experiences, which is becoming increasingly common, Figma has AI built into it. There are a lot of other tools like Lovable and stuff like that that can generate interfaces. If you are leaning into that, one of the first things you're going to have to be looking out for is just low quality design. And what I mean by that isn't that it necessarily looks bad or it's kind of retro Web 2.0 kind of vibes. What I mean is that it's low quality from an accessibility perspective. So it might have low color contrasts. It might have text that's too small. It might have target areas that are too small. So things that just fundamentally don't meet accessibility requirements. The second thing to look out for, and AI is really prone to doing this, is just excessive content. So we know that AI likes to generate a lot. It goes for quantity over quality sometimes. And when you're generating an interface, you've got to be really careful that it's not creating a lot of visual noise. One of the things I often talk about is if you're sort of trying to assess the visual hierarchy of your page, is to look at it and kind of squint your eyes a little bit so everything goes a bit blurry, and then think to yourself, what is standing out to me on this page? What's jumping out? And if everything's jumping out at you all at once, if everything's yelling at the same volume, then that tends to mean that there is a lack of visual hierarchy on the page. And visual hierarchy is one of the most important ways that we can direct people's attention to what is most important on that page. So that's something to really keep an eye out for when you're generating design with AI. The third thing here, and I think this kind of goes without saying, is that generated interfaces may not appropriately support assistive technologies. And this is particularly true if you're going one step further and starting to use code generators, AI code generators, to actually build these experiences. If you're not specifying things like making sure that it's implementing tab ordering and tab navigation, if you're not making sure that it's implementing alt tags and the appropriate metadata and screen reader kind of tags and things, then it's not going to work with those assistive technologies, which is automatically going to exclude a whole bunch of people who are trying to use that service. The next thing to consider there is also inconsistency in UI. So one of the most critical things that makes your website usable and easy for people to work with is consistency. If you are using the same styles, the same layouts, the same predictable interaction methods for getting the same kinds of data, that's what people rely on to help them predict and understand how to interact with your site. And that's particularly important for people who may be working with cognitive deficits, or they may have, neurodiversity, things like that, where they really rely on the structure of the site and the consistency of the site to make it easy for them to use. AI-generated interfaces, if not given the appropriate context, can essentially start from scratch each time. So you might end up with multiple different ways of displaying the same kind of information, multiple different ways of accessing the same page, and that creates confusion and complication. And then the last one there is just a lack of overarching UX strategy. So again, if we go back to our intern example, your intern probably doesn't really understand what your overarching UX strategy is. They may not understand what the goal of that page is. They may not understand the role that that page plays in a broader journey to achieve a business outcome. So it's really critical when you're looking at AI to make sure that you're considering what it's generating within your broader UX strategy. Now, on the flip side, there are opportunities. And the first one is one of the ones that I think is most exciting, which is the opportunity to create dynamically personalized experiences. So AI can learn a lot about the person that is interacting with your site, and it can then make decisions, especially when you start moving into sort of agentic AI, which is that, next stage that we're looking at. It can really start making decisions about how it's going to display certain content, what kind of content it's going to display to meet the needs of the person that is using the interface at a given time. And following on from that, you start getting into things like generative UI, which is when the site itself is responding and adapting to the needs of the person interacting with it. So a really simple example of this is something like, and you may have noticed this before if you use Facebook, but the bottom tab in your Facebook app will sometimes change. So if you're in Marketplace and you're buying and selling and haggling a lot, it will put the Marketplace link in your tabs. If you don't really use Marketplace and you're using groups or whatever the case may be, it will put groups in your main tab. Now, that's a very simple example, but you can imagine extrapolating that out to an entire website, adapting to what's important to you, but also adapting to who you are, how you access content, and what abilities you may have to be able to do that. And I'll quickly speed through these last few. So leveraging AI monitoring tools is a great way to help you identify and address potential issues. And more AI is moving into not just helping you identify what those problems are, but actually suggesting ways to address them and being able to automate that as well. So like Toby was talking about before, alt text is a great example of this. One of the big culprits of non-compliance is lack of alt text or missing alt text. And it's a great use case for being able to use AI to fix that. AI-assisted design tools, like I mentioned, Figma has got a lot of AI features in it now. This is a great way to just create efficiency within your team and to scale and create consistency. So you can define what accessibility looks like for your interface and then leverage those tools to scale it. And then lastly, AI-assisted user testing tools are really exciting, whether that's quantitative testing like A/B testing, or even AI-assisted qualitative testing now, where you can have an AI interview real people and scale your ability to use a test and user research, which again is really important from an accessibility perspective. So I think one of the things we really need to consider in this future where websites are adapting and they're personalizing and they're, shifting and changing to meet the needs of the person using them is that we have to strike a balance. It's very tempting to consider, I want my website to just evolve around the user. I want it to adapt. I want it to put everything they care about front and center, right? And there are benefits to that, but if it's not done responsibly, you end up creating a site that's not particularly usable. And I think this is a really great analogy to help think about that. Like if you imagine every time you get in your car in the morning to go to work, you drive out your driveway, and overnight the roads have rearranged themselves to be more optimal, right? And that's like theoretically, that's good, right? Theoretically, if it's going to take me less time to get to my destination, it's going to take me 2 minutes less to get to work. That's a desirable scenario. But you can imagine how disorientating that would be and how much cognitive load it would place on you to have to relearn the way to work every single morning, even if it is a more optimal way to get there. And so we really need to balance the need for optimizing experiences and meeting customers where they are and creating great outcomes for them with the need to have a consistent mental model that means that users can predict how the site works, that they have a key touch point that helps them understand where they are and where they can find information that they're looking for. And that's why it's really, really important to have things like a personalization strategy in place so that you can clearly identify what content you're happy to personalize, what content you're happy to be dynamic, and what content is really foundational and what elements of your experience are foundational that make it, so that your customers know how to get to work.
I think one thing that's really interesting there as well, Kat, is like testing as well. So in the example you gave, which is a great one, like the Facebook app having a marketplace icon for some people and not for others, they will like test that like beyond belief, right? They'll implement it. They'll have the idea. They'll have some theory behind why it's a good idea, and it's a small change. They'll implement it and they'll test it, right? They'll look at conversion rates. They'll look at how many people are accessing it. And they won't necessarily just assume it's a great idea. They'll see how users fare with it. They might A/B test it, for example. And that's something I think you can factor into this as well when you are making small changes, which we would recommend you do. Test them, like have success measures applied to them, right? Which kind of go, rather than us just sort of as a feeling, it feels like a better experience. Actually, let's have some kind of tangible metrics that go, yeah, we can prove that it's better because people are getting to things quicker or finding what they need more efficiently or whatever it might be.
Yeah, 100%. So with all of that in mind, I think it's really important that we have some clear principles for how we approach design when we're using AI-assisted technologies. And I won't run through all of these, but a couple of things I do just want to touch on. One is being specific about what accessibility requirements you're trying to meet and specifying those when you're using these design tools to make sure that they're not missed, because it's not something that your AI is automatically going to include. The second one is a design system. I think this is something that is so critical because it's an input that you can give the AI to go, this is the language that we use to build our experiences. And it gives it something that it can then use as building blocks to create those experiences rather than starting from scratch. And so immediately you're setting yourself up to have more consistent experiences. And then the last one I want to just touch on here is including a strategy and page goals in your prompts. So again, this is something that your AI is not automatically going to know unless you tell it. It's a really important piece of context for you to go, I'm generating this page, and the goal of this page is for people to click on this button, or the goal of this page is for people to understand the entry requirements for this course. Without that information, it doesn't have anything to use to help inform what is most important on that page or where it should be directing attention. All right. So
Do that one there.
thank you. So moving on from there, I think the last thing we want to cover off today is what we call the new path to content discovery. And what that is, you can go to the next slide now, Toby. Thank you. Is that users want answers, not search results. So what we mean by that is that the rising popularity of tools like ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and Gemini and Copilot and all of those AI assisted tools, the rising use of those is really changing end user behavior fundamentally. So gone are the days where people are interested in, putting in a keyword, getting a list of search results, clicking through multiple pages in Google, going backwards and forwards, doing a whole research project to find the information that they need. These days, people expect answers and they expect them to be summarized. They expect them to be contextualized to them and the question that they asked. They expect them to be personalized. And they expect them to be accurate. And so we talk about that in terms of conversational search, this idea that rather than putting in a keyword and getting a list of search results, people are expecting to be able to put in a question and get an answer. And, that is really what we call the era of content without clicks, this idea that rather than clicking through a deep navigation, you're just going to bubble the right information up towards me. And I think there are some really interesting accessibility benefits to that are worth considering.
One thing just to add to that as well, a very quick route to making you feel old very quickly is typically I do a lot of work with our university customer base, and sitting down interviewing students and running focus groups, and how quickly amongst particularly that demographic, so Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the concept of like a traditional search to a lot of them already feels quite old-fashioned, right? Like for me and a lot of like my peers, you've grown up with Google and you've been trained on how to use Google to elicit search results, and you hope you find the right one. I think it's genuinely amazing, like a bit of a kind of a real fundamental shift in behavior is very quickly, for certain demographics, making that traditional search experience feel a bit obsolete. And yeah, I really think in like 3 to 5 years, maybe it'll, to most people, it will seem like really archaic if you experience things that only have sort of the traditional search experience. And the absence of things like conversational experiences, I think, will be really conspicuous by their absence. So yeah, great way to make yourself feel old. Spend a few hours in a room with Gen Alpha talking to you about how they use search.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, following on from that, this is a really interesting statistic, which is that they're predicting that 90 million people in the United States are going to be using conversational search as their preferred search method by 2027. So not just that they're going to be using it, but they're going to be using it as their primary go-to search method as opposed to going to something like Google. And so that really does signal that sort of fundamental shift in behavior.
Yeah. And what does that mean for accessibility? It means a bunch of things, a few of which we've kind of pulled out onto the slide here. The first one is around results tailored and personalized to the audience. We've kind of talked about it before. A good example that Kat and I have kind of previously discussed for that is around like banking, for example. So if you take scams in banking, which is a really kind of prominent topic at the moment, it's very likely that Gen Z or Gen Alpha will want content delivered to them in a very different way to how baby boomers might want that content, for example. A lot of the research points to, baby boomers tend to be at the rough end of people that get targeted for that kind of thing. They maybe possess certain or lesser levels of digital literacy versus Gen Z, maybe a bit of a generalization. But yeah, you're going to want to potentially talk to those two audiences in very different ways in order to make that content feel accessible to those audiences. Direct answers versus traditional search results. We kind of talked about this just a moment ago. But that also kind of, I think, connects quite nicely to the point in the bottom right there. So the idea of reducing cognitive load on the user. Content without clicks, Kat mentioned that already. Don't make them click on 5 different things when we can give them the answer that they need straight off the bat. Like that is like accessibility in its purest form. That's an amazing, I think, advancement in how people access information. Simplicity of interaction as well. So this also enhances the simplicity of the interaction that a user has. users don't have to construct these mental models around your content. They don't have to know what kind of language you use, what sort of language you use in your menus, where that content is necessarily housed. They can get straight to the point. There's an amazing stat, I think it may have moved on even more now, but I think it's around 60% of Google searches now don't result in a further click, which is amazing, and testament to the power of Gemini. People are just getting answers right. They're not needing to go to that next level of clicking on a link, hoping it's the right one, scrolling through some content, finding the particular fragment that they need. And yeah, again, that's an amazing advancement, I think, in general accessibility of information.
Yeah.
The kind of final one there as well, sort of intent-based navigation. So conversational search is excellent at really genuinely understanding what a user actually wants, much better than sort of traditional keyword search that typically links up a keyword and tries to match it to a word in a particular bit of content. That can work quite well, but it doesn't get to the true intent, the true goal of what the user is actually trying to experience. So yeah, conversational search is a brilliant thing from that point of view. And I think all 5 of these things on here really speak to just accessibility in its purest form. Like if you think about accessibility, it's access to information, right? It's a really simple thing. Being able to get answers to your questions without the need to do anything further, without the need to click and learn mental models and understand how language is presented in different organizations. This is such an amazing, I think, enhancement on that experience.
Absolutely. Toby, sorry, just to jump in. I see we're a couple of minutes over.
Yeah.
Do we want to skip to
Yes.
the end just to do a couple of the questions? Because there's some really good questions in here.
Absolutely.
We will share the deck as well, so you guys can read those last couple of slides. But I did want to just make sure that we get to some of the questions. So the first one here from Lisa says, and I think this is in response to the poll, that there was no option in the poll as like none of these. But her biggest challenge is that the results aren't the same each time. So how do we actually know and trust that the results are accessible?
That's a great question, and that's something that we get a lot. So often, or just like a good starting point for that question would be, yes, absolutely right. Even if you ask conversational search an identical question 5 times, you will get a slightly different answer each time. That is not to say that you'll get worse answers each time. The premise is that you'll get an acceptable, you'll get a good answer each time. And if your content is in sufficiently good shape, so where your LLM is taking that information from, if that is written in the appropriate way, if it's written in accessible formats, it's got the metadata included, it's got the alt tags, all of that kind of stuff, then the hope is that every single answer it gives, even though it is different each time, will still adhere to, will be compliant, will have the accessibility related information in there. That shouldn't be a problem. If it is a problem, that should come up in testing, right? So part of the process we go through from a consulting point of view is to say, hey, give us your top 20 questions related to a certain topic. We'll then create like multiple variations of that question and how it might be asked.
Yeah.
We'll run it through the large language model a bunch of times, and every time it will give a different answer. But if at any point one of those answers, isn't compliant or isn't meeting accessibility criteria, that's a sort of red flag in the system where we say, hey, we need to maybe look at the content fragments, how it's written. Is there an issue with, the tagging of content, whatever it might be, so that even though the question is different, even though the answer is different each time, it's still totally compliant and accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so another question we had here. So as AI evolves and becomes more agentic, do you see our, i.e. clients, roles becoming more rooted in strategy and governance? And yes, I think, very much so. Excuse me. I think as we've talked about today, the AI being the intern, well, that's a little bit of a sort of tongue-in-cheek example. It does really, I think, speak to the relationship that's going to start emerging between the AI and what we're expecting them to do, and the level of direction and essentially leadership that needs to come from the humans who are managing that AI. So as we are using AI to automate simple tasks, low-value tasks, and then potentially even increasingly complex tasks, our responsibility is really going to be in understanding the strategy and what we're trying to achieve, and then in providing the right instructions to the AI. And that's where that prompt engineering becomes so critical. I think prompt engineering is really going to become one of those very key skill sets that are going to be in demand in the coming years, because it is really the ability to translate the strategy and what you're trying to achieve into clear, well-articulated requirements that the AI can then leverage. I think the other thing to consider here as well is that while we can use AI to generate content and generate interfaces and all of those sorts of things, the human element to that is still going to be important, because you can imagine that over time, content is critical to AI. Over time, the internet is going to fill up with a bunch of AI generated content. So you're going to have a whole bunch of content that's being written by bots for bots, the bots consuming the content written by the bots, and so on. So I think that human element and actually creating the content, writing the content, putting the humanity and expertise into that content, and judiciously using AI to assess it, improve it, refine it, is still going to be really important. And that doesn't just go for content, that goes for anything that you're creating. The human ingredient in what we create is always going to be important and is always going to act as a differentiator for your content, against other content that's being just stock generated by AI. So I think that's really important to remember as well. But yeah, look, thank you so much, everybody. I know we've gone a little bit over time. There were a few more questions, but we will make sure that we answer those and send through those responses, with the link to the video and with the slide deck as well. Please, if you enjoyed this series, keep an eye out for future webinars. We'd love to see you again. And follow us on LinkedIn, say hi, keep in touch. And if you have any other questions or any thoughts, please contact us and let us know. We very much enjoyed being here with you in the session. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.